Good morning. I am Deep Saini at the University of Canberra, speaking with Michelle Gratton in our weekly conversation about politics. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi, Deep.
Michelle, last week was quite a week in politics.
It was amazing and not in a good way.
An article on BBC website dubbed Australia as the democratic coup capital of the world. They went on to say that if a movie were made about Australian politics, it would have to be X-rated and would probably be directed by Quentin Tarantino. So quite a bloodbath, and we now have a new Prime Minister in Scott Morrison. He came to power after what was essentially a coup engineered by Peter Dutton. Malcolm Turnbull is out of politics. Where does this leave the coalition now?
Well, its rebuilding job, I think, is enormous. What ministers are trying to do today is say, well, yes, that was all very bad, but we now have to look to the future. But I think that it was so bad that many people would believe that the government is really accountable for what happened and should explain what happened. And of course they haven't been able to do that. They were quite close in the polls, and therefore it wasn't as though Malcolm Turnbull was a lost cause electorally. Yes, he was behind, but he'd been closing the gap somewhat. What we've seen is the Conservative wing of the party essentially declare Malcolm Turnbull unacceptable to it. They didn't like him personally and they didn't like his policies, and as he said, they staged an insurgency. But I think that many voters would think, well, we voted Malcolm Turnbull in, albeit narrowly, at the 2016 election, and if we want to get rid of him, it should be up to us, not up to this group in the party. And so I think there's a lot of explaining still to do. When Julia Gillard overthrew Kevin Rudd, she said it was a good government that had lost its way. The Liberals derided that explanation, and so did many voters, but the Liberals now have not even given as good an explanation as that for what's happened.
Yeah. We'll talk about the future in a moment, but let's go to the past a bit. Turnbull government was elected with a lot of hopes. People had a great deal of hope from him personally and from the government. What went wrong here?
I don't think he was a very good manager in government. I think that he was very good at climbing the greasy pole, as it were. He was always very ambitious to be top dog and managed that. But when he got there, he didn't really know very well how to run the show. He also got there by selling out, frankly, on some of his beliefs and giving ground to people whose support he needed, but whose policies he didn't actually share. So when he arrived in power, out in the general community, they saw someone, suddenly they didn't know. They thought he would be different, and that caused disillusionment. And then of course you had a lot of internal opponents who never accepted his legitimacy. So it was a combination of things. To an extent, he brought about his own destruction, but also he had enemies determined to destroy him at all costs.
A bit of live by the sword, you die by the sword.
Well, very much so, and we've seen that so often in Australian politics in the last decade.
Yeah. Looking to the future, Scott Morrison has announced his new slate of ministers, but that was preceded, not surprisingly, by the resignation of Julie Bishop from the front bench. She left some big shoes behind. Is the new Foreign Minister, Marise Payne, really up to filling those shoes?
Well, we'll see on the international stage and in foreign policy. Marise Payne is very much across issues. She's diligent, she understands foreign affairs, she's been in the related area of defence. So in one sense she brings a very good background to the job, but I don't think on the international stage she'll have the presence and style of Julie Bishop. I don't think any person who inherited that that role from Julie Bishop would have quite that presence. But more importantly, domestically, Julie Bishop carried a big political load. She was on the media defending the government's position generally, not just in her portfolio. She was running around the country to marginal seats. She raised a lot of money. Now, Marise Payne won't do any of those things to any great extent. So I think that that gap left by Julie Bishop is a pretty big gap. And on the question where the Liberals are often under attack, and that is not having enough women and women in prominent positions, you've now got no woman in the Liberal leadership group. In the government leadership group, of course, you've got Bridget McKenzie from the Nationals. You have got one more woman in the cabinet, but I don't think that there's an equivalence there when Julie Bishop has been lost.
Well, this whole saga was precipitated by Peter Dutton. He's really the engineer-in-chief of the demise of, or political demise of Malcolm Turnbull and essentially the reshuffle of the government. He's back in the cabinet now. What does that mean for the party and for the coalition and the government itself?
I think personally this shows pretty bad political standards by a party, that you reward the person who went out and politically killed the leader. The Liberals are trying to say, well, nothing to see here, this is just as you'd expect. Well, you would only expect it because the Conservatives are so strong in the party that Peter Dutton simply couldn't be left out of the cabinet for political reasons. But again, out in the real world, I think that ordinary voters would say, well, in my life, I wouldn't be rewarding someone who behaved like that. And again, I think that's another indictment on the Liberal Party and on the process that we've seen in the last week or two.
Perhaps the state of our politics.
That's right, and it's a reason why we see in the work, particularly that Canberra University does on political trust, that things have got so bad, trust has got so low.
Now, you spoke about the Conservatives being such a force within the party. Malcolm Turnbull, as he was leaving, he has said that there are people in the party who are trying to move the party to the right. Now, they've been, to a degree, quietened for now, but they are not out. What do you think is going to happen in the future? Where does the coalition go with so many Conservatives trying to pull it to the right?
I don't think they'll give up the quest. I think that on energy policy, which of course is now totally up in the air to the despair of business, and on the issue of immigration, they will want the policies to change. They're not going to be satisfied simply with a leadership change, especially given that obviously they haven't got what they want on leadership. They've got a middle course, a compromise. They're going to continue to agitate on policy, and how effective they will be in getting changes, well, we'll see in the coming months. But Scott Morrison is really going to have his work cut out, I think, to manage the pressures on him and to present a credible set of policies for the election.
So this is not over yet, not by a long shot.
No, it's not. And if the Liberals lose, it's a battle that could go on in opposition to for the soul of the Liberal Party.
All right, Michelle, we'll wait and see. Thank you again for, again, This Week in Politics.
Thanks, Steve.